In 1917, a revolution broke out in Russia, promising a new era of freedom, equality, and social justice. The communist upheaval was violent. But despite its declared intentions, it failed to promote the emancipation of mankind. Instead, it set a new record of terror and oppression. During the 1920s, young Jews left Russia and went to Palestine to take part in the creation of the Jewish national home. They too were motivated by idealism and were determined to establish in their old land a new society, free, egalitarian, and just. A socialist utopia. What happened to these pioneers? What became of their dream? In 1914, just before the outbreak of the First World War, there were approximately 13 million Jews in the world. The United States already had a Jewish community of 3 million. Another million Jews lived in Western and Central Europe, while fewer than 1 million inhabited all the Islamic countries between Iraq and Morocco. The vast majority of Jews resided in Eastern Europe, 8 million, almost 2/3 of the entire Jewish people. Here, especially in the towns and villages of Tsarist Russia, the Jews were living in poverty, crowded together with no civil rights. Anti-Semitism in Russia was in its most violent form. Murderous pogroms led millions to emigrate to Western countries, primarily the United States. America, then open to all, promised freedom from persecution. This was the democratic country whose streets, so it was said, were paved with gold, and every newsboy could become a millionaire with a little luck. Not all Jews were carried away by the American dream. The Zionist movement, for example, called on the Jews to return to Palestine, there to become an independent nation. But a most outstanding phenomenon was the number of Jews who were attracted to the Russian revolutionary movement.
We believed that the socialist movement and the revolution which we all yearned for would essentially solve the Jewish question. Pogroms, the hatred, and the rest. We felt that the Jewish problem could only be solved by the socialist revolution, for then all mankind would be equal.
The suffering of Eastern European Jewry culminated in the course of the First World War. The eastern front of the war coincided with Jewish population concentrations. More than 500,000 Jews were driven from their homes. 100,000 of them died of starvation and disease. In their despair, the Jews learned within 1 week, the first week of November 1917, of two events which were destined to change Jewish history dramatically. The first such event concerned Zionism. On November the 2nd, 1917, the British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour issued the declaration known by his name, promising to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
My own feeling, I was very elated, and then that's what I felt, that really there is God, or there is justice, there is something, and something is going to the world will change, and to the good. And that's all. How can you describe happiness?
A Zionist commission arrived in Palestine soon after the Balfour Declaration was issued. Tel Aviv, the 9-year-old Jewish suburb, welcomed the commission enthusiastically. The commission, headed by Dr. Chaim Weizmann, who 30 years later would become first president of the State of Israel, visited the Western Wall in Jerusalem. This visit to a relic of the Jewish state of ancient times appeared to close one historical cycle and usher in a new era.
And I remember to have read or to have told that even in Russia they were celebrating, so they even had that famous singer, Shalatin. There was one of the most famous singers in the world, a basso profundo. There was a tremendous mass meeting in Russia, I think it must have been in Moscow, or Petersburg, I don't know, Moscow, where Shalatin was singing Hatikva.
But the joy of Russian Zionists was short-lived. On November the 7th, 5 days after the Balfour Declaration, the communists, then called Bolsheviks, seized power in Russia. The revolutionary leader, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, totally rejected Zionism, although he staunchly opposed anti-Semitism. He claimed that from now on, every Jew, like any other human being, would enjoy freedom and equality. Many Jews indeed believed that the revolution would put an end to hatred, discrimination, suffering, and persecution. A considerable number fought and even fell in revolutionary battles.
The grave was in the fields of March, which was a training ground of Tsarist soldiers. Veteran party leaders addressed the public. One came over to us and said, "You should be very proud of your comrades and of my own friend Lupatin. They were true revolutionaries, prepared to sacrifice themselves. You too have arrived with a red flag. I wish to join you in saying, long live our comrades, our Jewish friends. Long live the revolution." And we all responded in Hebrew, "Hey, Dad!"
This picture is from the Bolshevik Party conference which convened in Petrograd in July-August 1917, 3 months before the Bolsheviks seized power. In the top row, alongside the Bolshevik leader Lenin, we see 3 Jews, Zinoviev, Trotsky, and Kamenev. In the second row, there is only one Jew, Sverdlov, later the first president of Soviet Russia. Incidentally, to the left of Sverdlov, we see young Stalin, then only of secondary importance. The most important revolutionary leader, second only to Lenin himself, was Leon Trotsky, formerly Bronstein, the man who played a decisive role in planning, organizing, and accomplishing the revolution. On November the 8th, one day after the uprising, the leaders met at the Smolny building in Petrograd to appoint the first government. Maria Joffe, an aide to Trotsky, was also there. From an adjoining room, she followed the proceedings with the help of a comrade.
Затем появляется через некоторое время и говорит:
He poked his head into the room and said, "Foreign Minister Trotsky."
Министр иностранных дел Троцкий. И мгновенно исчезает.
Then he immediately disappeared. After some time, he'd return and say, "Minister of Education." And we answered in chorus,
Луначарский.
"Lunacharsky."
Совершенно верно, Луначарский.
Yes, absolutely right, Lunacharsky.
Вот такие времена.
Those were the days.
И действительно приходит через...
Later, he came in and told us there won't be any ministers.
Министров никаких не будет. Полное молчание.
Utter silence.
Будут
There will be people's
народные
commissars
комиссары.
and a council of people's
И
commissars.
будет совет народных комиссаров. Тогда,
Then
понимаете,
I shouted,
кто
"And who
предложил?
suggested that?" Trotsky.
Да. И кто-то другой говорит.
Then someone
«Слушай,
else
ты
said,
не беги,
"Listen,
кто
and who will be
председатель
chairman of
этого
your
совета
council of
народных
people's
комиссаров?»
commissars?"
Ну, дурачье. Конечно, Ленин.
"Oh, you fools. Lenin, of course." He called us fools because it was obvious that the chairman of the council of people's commissars would be Lenin.
Конечно, Ленин.
In his capacity as Commissar for Foreign Affairs, Trotsky traveled to the town of Brest-Litovsk, seeking to extricate Russia from the World War. His right-hand man was the noted Jewish revolutionary Adolf Joffe, Maria's husband. The two, Trotsky and Joffe, headed a Soviet delegation which would negotiate a separate peace agreement with the Germans, to be known as the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. However, no sooner had the communists been delivered from external war when a serious threat to their existence arose from within. Civil war broke out throughout Russia. Those were turbulent times. Regions destroyed several times during the Great War went up again in flames and smoke. Many held Trotsky responsible, for better or worse, for saving the communist revolution from defeat in the Civil War. In his new position as Commissar for Defense, he created the Red Army. During the Civil War, Jews joined the Red Army in increasing numbers, not out of ideological affinity, but rather because the opposing White Army had adopted a policy of pogroms. In the Ukraine alone, there were 1,326 pogroms, in which 70,000 Jews were murdered and hundreds of thousands were wounded. The man responsible for these atrocities was the commander of the Ukrainian army, Semyon Petlyura. Behind this gentle, intelligent face hid one of the most vicious murderers in Jewish history. His army attacked men, women, and children with a cruelty surpassing all that the Jews had suffered during the Tsarist era. Anti-Semitism not only transformed the course of Jewish history, but also by the late 19th and early 20th centuries had become a force which influenced world events. Anti-Semitism drove masses of Jews to the Russian revolutionary movement, and so ultimately was a factor in the communist victory. The Civil War lasted for 3 years. Trotsky, commander of the Red Army, sped in his armored train from front to front, delivering impassioned speeches to his troops. More than once, Trotsky proved a decisive factor in the course of battle. Under his charismatic leadership, the Red Army, his own creation, repulsed all White Army troops and the combined interventionist forces of Great Britain, France, and the United States. When Lenin, Trotsky, and their comrades founded the Soviet Union, the Jews merited full equality, but only on an individual basis. Nationally and culturally, they were condemned to assimilation and oblivion. Lenin severed Russian Jewry from the rest of the world's Jews and declared the Zionist movement illegal. Thousands of Zionists were exiled to Siberia as counter-revolutionaries. It was then that the expression "prisoner of Zion" originated. Only a few Zionists succeeded in leaving Russia for Palestine. A new era was beginning for the Jews in Palestine. Herbert Samuel had just arrived from England to serve as the first High Commissioner. The Jews could not conceive of a more fortunate choice. The High Commissioner was not only a Jew, but also a Zionist who supported the idea of Jewish revival in Palestine. The Jews of Palestine, who only yesterday were second-class citizens, subjected to Turkish tyranny and Arab scorn, were now like dreamers. A messianic feeling was in the air when they welcomed Herbert Samuel. Emotions ran high when Edwin, the High Commissioner's son, wed Hadassah, a native-born girl, in a traditional Jewish ceremony.
My wedding on December the 6th, 1920, was the first official reception, and he invited people from all over the country, and I was the High Commissioner's son, and the different district commissioners decided that their delegations from the different parts of Palestine should arrive with presents. Most of the presents were brass work. But the district commissioner of Beersheba had a brilliant idea that I should be made an honorary sheikh of the tribes of Beersheba. So without telling anybody, and immediately after the ceremony in the chuppah, a whole group of Arabs rushed at me. I didn't know what was happening, dressed me, and they prepared an agal and a kafiyah and an abaya and a special sword they brought from Damascus. It was a presentation. It landed me later in a lot of trouble because they expected me to get them out of all their troubles. But still, it was a nice gesture. And that was the official photograph. But I'm not a second T.E. Lawrence.
In the early 1920s, Palestine was largely desolate and arid. Its sparse population numbered only a few 100,000. Most Arabs lived in the hilly regions. The coastal plain and the valleys were deserted. The Jezreel Valley, the largest of all, was almost entirely a swamp, infested with malaria-bearing mosquitoes. The pioneers considered the restoration of the Jezreel Valley as the greatest challenge of Zionism. One group went to a desolate place called Ma'alul. The Arabs called the place the Swamp of Death, and its source of water the Poisoned Spring. The Jews began to dig canals and lay drainage pipes. Suddenly the swamps were drained, malaria disappeared, and the cooperative village of Nahalal was established. The pioneers of the Zionist movement believed that the creation of a new society must be done in the best possible manner avoiding the abuses of the capitalistic world. This was to be a model society with neither rich nor poor, and in which all would earn their livelihood from the fruit of their labors. The pioneers considered physical labor the highest value of their lives. Moreover, as socialists, it was unthinkable that their national home would develop as a colonial society of landlords, exploiting the labors of native sons.
I'll tell you how it was. First of all, a revolt against all that was yesterday. You didn't want to have anything to do with yesterday, but rather something entirely new. To build things up by yourself, to do things yourself. And another thing, we all grew up in cities, large and small, but that didn't matter. The truth was not to be found in the city, but in the fields, at work. That's where the truth was.
The pioneers were very young, mostly under the age of 20. With the fire of youth burning in them, they succeeded in transforming the dull, back-breaking reality of physical labor into the central experience of their lives.
Back-breaking work. We weren't used to such hard labor. But all our strength, all our enthusiasm was directed towards this ideal. The evenings were truly unique. We spent time with books, reading. We read a lot, philosophy, a bit of political science, psychoanalysis, Russian literature, Dostoevsky, Gorky, Tolstoy. There were moments when people burst into a confession of their past, telling how they viewed life, mankind, eternity. There were moments of tears, of laughter, moments of emotion which transcended the grey daily life. It was a special sort of spiritual banquet.
Alongside the spring of Ein Harod, mentioned in the Bible as the site of Gideon's battle against the Midianites, one group of pioneers pitched its tents.
When we arrived, we lived in tents. There were no shacks then. Malaria found us. Perhaps people didn't want to hear about it, but there was a lot of malaria. Conditions were difficult.
Ein Harod was something new and dramatic in the landscape of Palestine. It was not the first kibbutz, as there were already several small communes throughout the country, which many predicted would not last. Ein Harod was a breakthrough in the kibbutz movement. A large kibbutz, open to all, proudly upholding the ideals of social justice, freedom, equality, and collectivism.
This collectivism was such that I had nothing of my own. Neither my shirt, nor my undershirt, nor my underpants were my own. I wore them, but they were not my property. They belonged to the commune. Tomorrow, someone else might wear them. You might wear these underpants.
These were the pioneers. They were not content solely with the Zionist mission of making the Jezreel Valley bloom. With their socialist enthusiasm, they transformed the valley into a proving ground for daring utopian social conceptions, towards which mankind had previously aspired only in dreams. The news that the Jezreel Valley was in Jewish hands kindled a flame in many hearts. Hundreds came to participate in the great venture of transforming the region into a flourishing garden. Most pioneers had come from the distressed countries of Eastern Europe, but some hailed from more affluent lands, even from the United States.
It was very difficult work, and we had nothing to eat. There was a water shortage and terrible sanitary conditions. Do you know what it means to go out at night with a high malarial fever, to walk nearly half a kilometer to an outdoor toilet? We had nothing. There was nothing to eat.
In March 1929, the British Colonial Secretary Winston Churchill visited Palestine. He met with Jews and expressed deep sympathy for their aspirations, but the practical results of his visit caused them much regret. While in Jerusalem, Churchill met with the Hashemite Emir Abdallah and accorded him semi-independent rule over Transjordan. Churchill thus divided the promised land. All territory east of the Jordan River was handed over to the Arabs. The Jews had to content themselves with 1/5 of the mandatory region, which was originally designated for their national homeland. The map of the Middle East now began to look much as it does today. 7 Arab countries moving towards total independence extended over an area half the size of Europe. Jews were permitted to settle in only 1/2 of 1% of this area, and even that was not acceptable to the Arabs.
بالطبع في ذلك الوقت كان وعد بلفور في بدايته وشيء الناس
The Balfour Declaration was still new at the time.
هذا شيء خيالي ونظري.
Many believed that it was merely imaginary and theoretical.
منذ أن حل الإنجليز في فلسطين بدأوا يشعرون بأن وعد بلفور بدأ في.
But once the British took over Palestine, people began to feel that its implementation had begun.
ولكن شعور الناس خصوصا الواعيين.
The more alert among them sensed a danger to the Palestinian Arabs, one which demanded defensive action. Thus, people began to resist.
On May the 1st, 1921, 2 months after Churchill's visit to Palestine, riots broke out in Jaffa, in which 47 Jews were slaughtered by Arab mobs. But these riots, painful as they were, only reinforced the Zionist movement. Jaffa's remaining Jewish residents fled northward to Tel Aviv. From here on, the first Hebrew city began to develop at an astonishing pace. In 1921, the year of the riots, Tel Aviv was a garden suburb of Jaffa with a mere 4,000 inhabitants. Yet only 4 years later, in 1925, its population had increased tenfold to 40,000 Jewish residents. Tel Aviv, the 16-year-old Hebrew-speaking city, was now the pride of the Zionist movement. In 1925, Hebrew books and Hebrew newspapers were printed here. The first professional Hebrew theater commenced its performances, and there was even opera sung in Hebrew. The miraculous revival of the ancient language, a phenomenon unparalleled in history, did not just happen. It was helped along, among other things, by the policing activities of the so-called legions of defenders of the Hebrew language.
אחד מקווי הפעולה שלנו היה לחלק פתקים שהיה כתוב עליהם יהודי דבר עברית, לא עברית.
One of our activities was to distribute cards which said Jews speak Hebrew. We'd give them out to passers-by who were not speaking Hebrew. We'd throw them at all who walked by. We'd even go to Rothschild Boulevard, the one place where couples could make love. In the middle of a kiss, we'd throw a Jew speak Hebrew note at them. Once we even met Bialik and a friend there, speaking juicy Yiddish. We approached him and handed him a note. Bialik read it, looked at us and said, "It was him, it's not me. I speak Hebrew, it's him."
This was little Tel Aviv. Everyone knew everyone else. Everyone knew Bialik, the national poet, who would go walking coat in hand with the publisher, Radnitsky. Everyone knew Ahad Ha'am, the great teacher, the father of spiritual Zionism. Ahad Ha'am claimed that the major problem for the Jews was assimilation. He believed that Zionism must save not only Jews, but also Judaism. Only in the historic Jewish homeland, in a Hebrew-speaking environment, could Jewish life be continued. In April 1925, Ahad Ha'am went to Mount Scopus to witness what he considered to be Zionism's most important achievement, the opening of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. According to Ahad Ha'am, a university whose language was Hebrew was a primary tool for national resurrection.
In 1925, there was the official opening of the university, and I sat on the platform and I listened to the speeches. I heard the speeches of Balfour and Allenby and Herbert Samuel. It was shall I say, a portrayal forever of the cultural links, the links of the spirit of the returning Jewish people with its land. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem, it bespeaks our cultural heritage, our spiritual restoration. That's all I can say about it.
The guest of honor was Lord Balfour, author of the declaration which has enabled the Jews to re-establish their national home in Palestine. This was the first and only visit of the 77-year-old British statesman. He spent 3 weeks in the country as the guest of the president of the Zionist organization, Dr. Chaim Weizmann. Tel Aviv accorded Balfour an emotional welcome. Crowds gathered in the main streets, Herzl Street and Allenby Road. Sidewalks, balconies, windows and roofs were packed to capacity. People danced in the streets. Lord Balfour was especially impressed by his journey to the Jezreel Valley. From his railway carriage window, the British peer beheld a sight he had never seen before: Jewish horsemen.
The late Lord Balfour came in connection with the inauguration of the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus in the early or middle 20s, I don't remember. And we were at school, children at the time. And I remember the day because we made special black flags and went out in demonstrations to protesting against his policy and against him, in fact.
Except for demonstrating symbols of mourning against the Balfour Declaration, there were no disturbances on this occasion in Palestine. In 1925, the country's Arab population was not yet aroused politically. The man who succeeded in awakening the Arabs of Palestine was the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini. He did so not by voicing nationalist slogans, but rather through fomenting a religious conflict. He addressed the masses clearly, calling for a holy war. His battle cry was simple and easily comprehensible. Down with the infidels. In 1928, the Mufti created a crisis around the Western Wall in Jerusalem. For hundreds of years, Jews had poured out their hearts in prayer at this site, a remnant of the ancient walls of the Temple, the holiest prayer site of all to the Jewish people. On Fridays, Arab peasants who were coming to prayer at the Temple Mount heard sermons about the Zionist enemy who allegedly sought to burn down the Al-Aqsa Mosque and build the Jewish temple upon its ruins.
It was after the midday prayers, when heard in the distance a sort of roar like a football crowd. And the crowds pressed through the narrow streets of the old city and came out where I was, at the Damascus gate, singing, shouting with a sort of rhythmic fury that I was going to get to know pretty well in subsequent years of riot and rebellion in Palestine. I remember seeing a police officer, Kingsley Heath on his horse, charge the crowd to try and disperse it and make it go up towards Herod's Gate. I thought his horse would come down on the asphalt. He was charging the crowd to force it back, as British police would do on their mounted police would do in London. Another policeman whom I got to know very well later, Tessiman, who used to be later on with me in Tulkarm, came in with blood all down the side of his uniform, and he told me the killing had started in the Jewish quarters.
These were the 1929 riots. In 6 days, the Arabs, led by the Mufti, attacked more than 20 Jewish settlements throughout the country. Reports of murder, pillage, and destruction arrived one after the other, shocking the small Jewish population. Rioting reached its peak in Hebron, in which 66 Jews were murdered, old and young, men, women, and children.
My sister and I hid inside a bookcase, a sort of niche within the wall with glass doors. That's where we hid. I don't remember how long we remained there, but afterwards I remember that one of the rioters opened the doors to the niche and took us out of there.
ירדנו מתוך ארון הספרים שהיה מוגבע במקצת, והמתפרע הזה...
We came out of the bookcase, which was somewhat raised, and this rioter addressed my sister in Arabic. Bring us the money or we'll kill you. But then I remember that the house was full of rioters, and evidently there was nothing left to give them. Then I remember the sword in that man's hand, and apparently at this stage one of my father's Arab friends who had just entered the house intervened and chased the rioter away. He took us out of the house to a neighbor's home.
When the crowd got there, they said, "This is Abu Zaina's house, in which all the Jews are," and they wanted to kill the Jewish doctor. Before the crowd got there, I saw my uncle and asked him, "Do you have a weapon?" He answered, "Yes." "What do you have?" "A sword." I said, "Take it out. If any of them approach the steps, strike them with the sword." The crowd came and I asked them, "Where are you going? Shame on you. Whoever moves one step, I'll chop off his head." I cursed them and so on. In the end, they respected and feared us. My uncle, who stood there with sword in hand, they fled. And we saved all 40 to 50 people, and no one said a word.
התחלנו לראות את גודל האסון. ראינו מן החלונות שמבית אחי מורידים אלונקות, מורידים...
We began to realize the great extent of the catastrophe. We saw through the windows that from my brother's house people were carrying out stretchers, corpses, people.
דפים עלים מספרים.
I saw with my own eyes feathers from pillows and quilts flying in every direction, torn pages of books. They weren't content with murder and butchery, but even took out their anger on possessions. They destroyed, ripped and tore up everything they could lay their hands on.
The riots shook us severely. I believe that it was one of the few moments, perhaps the only one, that we were not certain whether we'd all remain alive. We had no confidence that the British were prepared to save us. We had virtually no weapons, very few. Pistols, a few rifles. And then all of a sudden this wave arose in Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed. There arose a wave of destruction.
In 1929, the small Jewish community in Palestine reached the depths of despair, facing not only Arab riots, but also internal economic difficulties, which threatened the future of the entire Zionist enterprise. Two years earlier, in 1927, the country had undergone its worst economic crisis. In the cities, thousands of unemployed persons roamed the streets. Many places suffered from famine. Suicides were all too common at the time. As the secretary of the Labour Federation rose to address a workers' meeting, the audience cried, "Leader, give us bread." "I have no bread," declared the speaker, David Ben-Gurion. "I have a dream." But even this dream was in dire straits. Many pioneers now began to realize that the idea of transforming the entire country into a large kibbutz, a socialist utopia, could not come true.
It was a severely critical situation. Many became disillusioned with Zionism at that time. A large proportion of the working population was unemployed. Factories closed down. There was a feeling that everything was crumbling. One faction, a small but highly select group, became wholly disheartened with Zionism and departed for Russia, hoping to build the communal society of their dreams within the Soviet Union.
The leader of the group which left for the Soviet Union was Mendel Elkind. He and his comrades, some of the finest pioneers of the time, now looked towards the Crimean Peninsula, seeking to participate in the Soviet experiment of transferring Jews to agriculture. The pioneers from Palestine established in the Crimea a Hebrew-speaking kibbutz called Via Nova, a new way. But bitter disappointment came all too soon.
We had no doubt that the revolution was for the sake of mankind. When I got there, I found that the value of man was the lowest of all. There was nothing lower than the value of human beings. If a man has no value, then what am I doing here? I had to escape from here as fast as I can, to get out as quickly as possible.
The reality encountered by the pioneers from Palestine in the Soviet Union was rather horrifying. Lenin's successor, Stalin, had instituted one of the cruelest reigns of terror and oppression in the history of mankind. Trotsky, the founder of the Red Army, was thrown out of Russia by Stalin.
Stalin's trial against me is built upon false confessions extorted by modern inquisitorial method.
Exiled to Mexico, Trotsky was subsequently murdered by an assassin sent by Stalin. Grigory Zinoviev, president of the Communist International, was executed by a firing squad. Such was the fate of Politburo member Leon Kamenev. Adolf Joffe committed suicide. His wife Maria was exiled to the prison camps of the north, where she served for 27 years on charges of Trotskyism. The Hebrew kibbutz in the Crimea was also liquidated by Stalin. Most of the men and some of the women were executed. Elkind himself disappeared somewhere in Siberia.
Yes, I had the courage to say, I don't want to be here. No, I want to return home. This is not my home. I'm not afraid even if it's dangerous. Nothing else interests me. Nothing here is worth half a cent to me. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. To come back to the Jezreel Valley, to the kibbutz. That's what I call home.
The dream of the pioneers to transform the land of Israel into one great kibbutz, a social paradise, was only partially realized. Not everyone was able to accept the burden of collective life. What remains of the dream are some 280 prospering kibbutzim, which developed in spite of all who said that such a way of life could not last.
מילל דממה ביזרעאל נו מה העמק ארץ תפארת ענו לך משמרת על מלמטה ולבנה מעל מבית אלפא עד נהלל ישראל, נו מהי מכרת תפארת, ענו לך משמרת. יהודים בשקט!
The kibbutz is one of the Zionist movement's proudest and most original creations. The only society in the 20th century in which socialism is realized on a voluntary basis, without compulsion or violence, and in which people enjoy not only equality, but also freedom.